And God spake all these words. So begins Exodus 20 in the King James Edition. Welcome to a Freeway Bible study. I'm Kurt, I'm your host. I'm a non-believer who studies the Bible every day and then reflects on it. And periodically I make a video like this. I make this video when I reach the end of a chapter and it's time to record my thoughts of that chapter. So I've made it all the way through Genesis and oh goodness, what did I do with that? Found it. And about more than halfway through Exodus now. Sorry, the volume's a little low. Once you get started, you gotta go. I forgot to put my earphones in. That's important, not only to allow me to listen to music later, but to deafen the sound of the noise, to help insulate my mind from the world while I think. Oh, the beauty of solitude. Anyway, let's get into this. So it took me, I think it's just under 2 months, maybe about a month and a half, to fully read and digest Exodus 20, which is the chapter wherein the Ten Commandments live. I really wanted to spend a lot of time on this one, give it a lot of thought, because I thought that a good understanding of the Ten Commandments would be important, given that it so plays these 10 laws play a weighty role in our society. Here we go, let's start the bike. So real quickly now, let me just recount those 10. Begins with, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt make no molten or graven images. Keep the Sabbath day holy. Do not take the Lord's name in vain. Maybe those two are backwards. Honor thy mother and thy father. Do not kill. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. What was this here? Do not bear false witness. And thou shalt not covet. A lot of things to not covet. Thy neighbor's house, his wife, his manservant, his maidservant, his donkey, or his ass. There, I think I've got them all covered. Now, keep in mind, that's just the one edition of the Ten Commandments. There's another version of the Ten Commandments a little later in the Bible. We'll get to that. Now, I'm going to take the slow way. This today, up and over the pass, because this is a new motorcycle. I think this is the first video I've made since I got this new motorcycle, and it's a little louder than my old motorcycle. So I'm going to go up and over the pass where I can get it down to like 55 miles an hour. Hopefully it'll be nice and quiet. Make sure this is sealed here. There we go. Let's go. Now there's more to Exodus 20 than just that. It opens with a very short preamble. Thou and the Lord spake all these words, which indicates that we have Moses in audience before God on Mount Sinai. Then it concludes with an interesting section where the people get scared and they run away, and then Moses remains with God in the smoking, firing mountain, and listens to a few more things that he's got to say. Let's get into that, though. Let's get into the whole thing. I covered a lot of base. I don't know if I'm going to remember all this stuff. Thou shalt hold no other gods before me. What more can you say? God is the jealous God. He doesn't want Doesn't want us worshiping anybody else. But I wonder, who gets jealous of an imaginary friend? Or is it just the action? He's not jealous of the God. He's jealous of the misattention. Or maybe it's a guidance to keep us on track so that we're not going astray. That's probably it. Okay, next, make no graven or molten image. Kind of like the first one, huh? But it's a little bit different. I think he's referring to household gods that people would have in their houses, the pagan images that they would have carried down from generation after generation. I saw these in Japan. Families have their gods that they keep around the house and in and outside the house. And he doesn't want any of those. And God cautions that he will punish unto the third and fourth generation those who disobey this command, which at first I thought meant that he would punish successively, generation after generation. They would come into existence and God would say, well, I remember you, your father or your grandfather, sinned against me, so I'm going to punish you too. But no, what it probably means instead is that God is going to be punishing the household, which has multiple generations in it. So if, for example, I was to worship a false god or make a molten or a graven image and bring it into the house, then God would punish the entire. He would basically punish the entire household, which includes all the generations within it at that time. God also says that he will, and he calls those who hate him. And he also says that he will reward unto thousands those who love him. I don't know if that means thousands of generations or thousands around them. Probably the thousands around them. It's kind of got an immediate sense to it. But it goes on to say a little more in there. It talks about not making any image of anything in heaven or earth or in the seas. I think this might be where the Muslims get their idea of not keeping any, or not having any, basically images of anything, right? That's why they decorate their temples and, their mosques and the like with geographic images and calligraphy rather than images. That seems pretty clear. I think it's in order to keep us from faltering by worshiping those things that we create. So at least that should be a good enough prohibition against having any such images in church. Catholics, are you listening? But doesn't it also mean to avoid that altogether? So there goes photography, there goes portrait art, there goes statuary. Wow. That looks a little more like the Muslim society that we know of, huh? The next one is that we shall not use the Lord's name in vain. And this is described as the unpardonable sin. That in particular, if you dig into it more deeply, it says that we shall not use the name of the Holy Ghost in vain. Now, of course, that can't be in the original, because the concept of the triune, Father, I hope I'm using that word right, the Trinity, I'm trying to use my $12 word for the day, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, that's a Catholic invention. So I don't think that would have been in the original Torah. But it's very clear that that's not going to be forgiven. In fact, I pursued this one quite a ways into the New Testament even. And even Jesus says, you may blaspheme against me, I'm paraphrasing in the voice of Jesus, is the best I can do. I will forgive you. Jesus basically says, I will, and I can't quite remember where, but I will forgive you if you speak ill against me, if you take my name in vain. But no one can be forgiven for taking the Holy Ghost name in vain. And if you get all the way back to the Torah, that basically means speaking of God. So that would mean, anything. The Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. Don't say things like, G-O-D, damn it, and stuff like that, because that's it. And you will not be forgiven. I did track that down, and it says that elsewhere as well in the New Testament. So I don't think that that's erased in any way. That's a heavy-duty one. I took away from that the impression that hell will be quite crowded with blasphemers. I wonder if there's a special level for them. This was also the point that I began to do some serious reading of the Torah. In fact, I bought myself about this time in my study of Exodus, a copy, actual physical copy of the Babylonian Talmud, which is the written version of the oral Torah, as strange as that sounds. And I got some pushback from my Jewish friends who I don't think were very pleased with me reading that. And I think I know why, because I've been reading it, although I haven't been talking very much about it. It's some pretty amazing stuff in there. Stuff that I imagine that to the Jews, they would imagine you really want to have a rabbi to help guide you through that and explain what the heck we're reading there. I could see if I was taking this Bible study as using it as a weapon, as to discredit or to mock the traditions of the Bible, that I could use the old Torah to that end very well. But I choose not to. That's not my goal. And maybe that's the reason why I don't talk about what I'm reading, because I don't want people to get that impression. But I'm cataloging these things that I'm learning and putting them in my head, and I'm learning a lot. It's very interesting. Anyway, that's the part also where it talks more about what it means to blaspheme. I learned a lot. So that was number 4, I think, right? No, that was number 3. Number 4 is keep the Sabbath day holy. And I may have mixed up one or two of those as we went along. I got them in the proper order, but I think that's it. Don't make any false gods. Don't cast anything in molten or graven images. Don't use the Lord's name in vain, and keep the Sabbath day holy. But what is the Sabbath day? That's Sunday for the Christians, Saturday for the Jews, and kind of Friday for the Muslims. How did that happen? What? And for the Muslims, it's not that much of an affair. It's basically, listening to some words from a holy man, I believe, on that day during prayers. For the Jews, it's a very big event. At sundown, of course, the Shabbat begins. Can't work at all. And then for Christians, I don't think they really do much of anything other than maybe go to church. But it's pretty clear you're not supposed to do any work. And I tried to get a good definition of work, which is, I don't need a definition from the Jews, because they've got that very clearly defined in the Torah, what they can and they can't do, even down to flicking light switches and things like that. For the Muslims, there really wasn't too much in terms of prohibitions. Well, it was apparently you're just going to get some learning on that day from the Imam. But for the Christians, I asked, and I only got a few responses, and it came down to 2 things. The Sabbath means, the definition of no work on Sunday for Christians means, and I know, guys, this is going to sound ridiculous, but this is only 2 people responded, but I shouldn't say that word ridiculous, but it did to me, because it sounds ridiculous to me, because I don't know of any Christians who do these things necessarily. I certainly didn't when I was a Christian. No work means no cooking and no eating. And I like the no eating one. That came from my friend Peter. Maybe that was just his own personal thing, and his idea was that if he wasn't, because it was an extension of the no cooking thing. If you're not allowed to cook, then if you eat, then especially if you eat at a restaurant or something like that, then you're inviting someone else to sin on that day by getting them to cook for you on your behalf. And Jews, Wow, my hands are getting wet. Oh, my pants aren't. There's enough moisture in the air. I imagine we'll break through these clouds soon. And Jews, aren't you doing the same thing when you invite the Gentile into your house to turn off the radio that the baby accidentally hit the button on? Aren't you inviting them to sin, or does it matter because these laws don't apply to them? Oh, that's important. These laws don't apply to them. The Ten Commandments only apply to the Jews. That's very clear. I learned that really early on. The Ten Commandments apply only to the Jews. That's because God says right at the beginning of the Ten Commandments, or actually, I think it's in Exodus 19, that these laws you're obligated to follow these laws by virtue of the fact that God liberated you from slavery in Egypt. Now, I don't think God liberated the Gentiles necessarily, unless there have been some interbreeding from any slavery in Egypt. That would be the Jews alone. And so I looked into this, and sure enough, that's the narrative. God has that covered too. There's something called the Noahide laws, which were the laws given to Noah. And those laws apply to everybody in the world, but the Ten Commandments applies only to the Jews. And I enumerated them, which was difficult to do. It was really hard. I actually had to spend about 2 weeks reading a book called the Book of Jubilees, which was kind of like a gospel. It's like another gospel. How do you describe it? It's like a summation of the entire history of the Old Testament, from creation up to Moses at the mountain with God. And in it, indeed, and through elsewhere, you're able to thread out the Noahide laws. And there's only like 6 of them. It misses 4. I think, if I can remember right, and I'm straining my memory, the things about you can blaspheme. These are the things you can do, because they're not listed as explicitly something you can't do. You can covet, you can bear false witness, and there's one more. Oh, there's a bike like mine. Hey! So anyway, and that was a biggie to discover that. So I spent a lot of time. Let me open my hood here for a second. Oh wow, that's beautiful. So so that's the thing. So that's a bad sin. You're not going to get forgiven. No forgiveness for you blasphemers. And then keep the Sabbath day holy. We talked about that already. That's the one I was on. And I think people are sinning on that one all over the place. So I think it's pretty clear. You're not supposed to work. You're supposed to lounge around, rest, and think of God, and maybe pray and talk of God. I'm guessing. No one gave me a clear answer except the Jews. The Jews gave me a very clear answer. In fact, it was really interesting. My one friend Kobe we were talking on this subject, and he had to text really quick, because he says it was Friday and he's on the East Coast, and he says I have to finish up. The sun's going down. And I really respect because he can't text after that. He can't work. He can't use any devices as soon as the sun goes down on Friday night. It's the beginning of the Sabbath. Even though I don't agree with his and other people's conclusions about this supernatural stuff being real, I really respect his commitment and determination to follow through on this stuff. And I also really respect the fact that he engages me and talks to me. So few people do. It's so interesting. I would have thought when I started this Bible study that believers would relish the opportunity to engage with someone like me who's asking these questions and set me straight. I think they all excuse me, I'm gonna cough. I think they're all hiding. I use that word deliberately because I do think that's the case. I think I wouldn't say that in polite company though. I think they're all using the excuse. There's somewhere in the New Testament says that if someone like me just refuses to listen to their good words, that they should just turn and walk away. I think they're using that as a reason to not engage with me. And that's a shame, I think, because my intentions are not dishonest or without virtue. I really want to understand.
what they're saying, and I am forming conclusions every day and every week as I move forward, and my conclusions are becoming more solidly in the camp that this stuff isn't true, largely because I find all these weirdo, strange contradictions and oddities and things that just are inconsistent, and no one corrects me, which just builds more and more evidence that this is all just fairy tales and myth. And I do have a small audience on the world stage in terms of the YouTube and elsewhere, and I know by the feedback that I'm getting that this Bible study is influencing some people away from Christianity. So I would hope, wow, look at that. I would hope that in the interest of perpetuating their own beliefs, that they would at least engage me for the sake of showing me that I'm wrong, and so that even if I'm obstinate, that a third-party observer can look and say, Kurt's really being a dick, or Kurt's really being stubborn or hard-headed or hardened his heart, as it might say if we get a little Exodus in us, and then see otherwise. But otherwise, if a third-party observer is observing me to make a statement, they get a handful of people who tend to agree with me, chiming in support of that, maybe one or two who don't, chiming in and making a good effort, and then they come away perhaps a little more swayed that it's not true. Join the fight, you guys, you believers. I think your God would want you to. And if not, do it for fun. What have you got to lose? You've got right on your side. What did you possibly have to lose? So there you go. So that's number 4. Now let's get on to number 5. Those 4 right there, I think about them. Those are not common laws or even moral laws. I think the word is liturgical laws about well, not even that. They're just basically laws about the relationship between us and God, and we need to basically ensure that we're keeping God first, keeping His name holy, and keeping His day sacred, and keeping Him foremost in our minds. Those are the purpose of the first 4 of the 10 Commandments. Number 5. Honor thy mother and thy father. This is an interesting one. At first, I was kind of, without really thinking very much about it, my first response was, yeah, but what if your mom and dad are a dick? What if they're bad people? And I guess that's still, my question still holds, and I can't quite remember, but I did pursue that line of inquiry, and I found it kind of not to be really very wanting. In fact, I don't even think I brought it up once in my Bible study, but it's still in the back of my mind. But I think what it really means is to not necessarily do everything that they say, but respect them and have their best interest in your heart. Pretty sure I'm not capturing all of the stuff that I learned on this one. And I guess that's okay. I guess this would be a moral law. This is the first truly moral law of the 10 Commandments. Honor thy mother and thy father. And I know there was more to it. It's not coming to me. But let's move on. Number 6. Thou shalt not murder, or in the case of the King James edition, thou shalt not kill. Now remember, I read my Bible 3 parts. I read it New International Edition, King James, and then the Torah. And I usually read it aloud. I read it one time in my mind, just reading it. Then I listen to it being spoken aloud by a recording. Then I listen to it and then read it simultaneously, listening to it in King James and reading it in New International. So it's like superimposing the 2 versions in my mind. And then I read the Torah with the rabbinical commentary, the comments of the respected rabbis of the world, namely Rabbi Rashi. Thank you, Colby, for turning me onto that resource. And in those the three versions, it was very clear, and in speaking with believers, it's very clear that they want us to interpret that as thou shalt not kill. thou shalt not murder. I got that backwards. Because murder, of course, is unjustified, non-judicious killing. Corporal punishment, killing someone during corporal punishment, killing someone during war, things like that are allowed. But murder, which is the unjustified, unlawful killing of someone, that's prohibited. Interestingly, though, the King James edition gets that, which is probably the most popular among most of the Christians I know. It was the only version of the Bible I read when I was a believer. It actually uses the word kill. And I asked everybody, well, why is that? And it was kind of crickets. So I still don't have a good answer about how God would allow that important bit of nuance to be, neglected in the two versions. Three versions, really. That's going to come up later. Also, something about kidnapping came into it. I can't quite remember what it was because it's been so many weeks now. There was something about kidnapping came up in this. I can't quite remember what it was. That this particular commandment has a lot to do with kidnapping. I wish I could remember. Footnote to self. Next is number 7. Thou shalt not. Oh wow, look at that. A woman on a big old trike. Was it steal here? Or commit adultery? I think it's steal. Thou shalt not steal. Pretty straightforward. Don't steal. But then, some obvious things like, well, what if you're starving and your family are starving and you just had to steal a loaf of bread or a slice of bread out of an open window or to feed your family? Is that bad? Is that a sin? I don't know. There's more to it too. I feel like I got in so much more deep, so much depth when I was doing the actual proper Bible study. And now these things are kind of falling false. Or they're just, I can't remember the depth. Now let's move on. Next is thou shalt not commit adultery. Yeah, don't be sleeping around. But this really only applies to men. I mean to women. Women can't be committing adultery. Men can do that. Men can have extramarital relations with unmarried women, slaves, and unprotected virgins. Or I guess unprotected women, particularly unprotected virgins, who they can make their wives. We learn that later in the Bible. Make them their wives. You can rape your way into matrimony. It comes up later in the Bible. That's the way we handle. If a maiden is found by a man and he lies with her forcibly, and they're caught, he's to pay her father, I think it's 20 shekels of silver, and marry her, and he can never divorce her. Which I guess, gosh, if you think about it in a really primitive sense, I mean, I heard the argument that I heard was that, what else is going to happen to her? Nobody's going to want her, I guess. But really, couldn't God do better than that? Couldn't make some better laws than that? Than to, you're the village loser. No woman wants you in the village. And so you just catch the woman that's got you, the virgin that's got your fancy, that you have your fancy on, and unawares you rape her, and hey, now you got yourself a wife. Rape your way into matrimony. Anyway, that's not punishable. You're punishable in my marriage. Oh gosh, I shouldn't laugh. You can also have sex with slaves, prostitutes, and other women. But if you have sex with other unmarried women. You have sex with a married woman and you're caught, both you and the woman will be caught. And if the woman is the daughter of a priest, she's to be burned to death. Otherwise, the punishment is stoning for both of them. So don't be messing around. And it's not very equitable. It really is protecting a man's property rights over his woman. Okay, the next one is, and I think this is number, what is this, 8? Wait, hold on. So 5 is honor thy mother and thy father. 6 is thou shalt not kill. 7 is thou shalt not steal. 8 is thou shalt not commit adultery. Oh, we're into the home stretch. 9 is thou shalt not. I can stay in this lane. Thou shalt not. It's in court of law. What do you call it when you bear false witness? That's right. Don't bear false witness. Don't lie in court. And there was more to that, but I can't remember. And then the last one, which is a doozy, is thou shalt not covet. Don't covet thy neighbor's wife, his house. It's always his manservant, his maidservant, his donkey, or his ass. Ass is in, the animal, not the other thing. And not that too. Sorry. So, I have a real question about that one. That's like thought crime. How do you stop yourself from coveting? I mean, to me, the real sin is acting upon it. I mean, it's actually a virtue if one can have a desire and then overcome that desire and not act upon it. That's a pretty impressive thing to be able to do. But that's it. So I guess that's a good one in a way. Still on. Okay, so then the chapter ends. That's the 10 Commandments. Let's see if I can go through them real quick again. Remember them. Thou shalt not hold another god above the Lord, or something like that. 2, thou shalt not make any graven or molten images. 3, keep the Lord's name. Don't take the Lord's name in vain. 4, keep the Sabbath day holy. 5, honor thy mother and father. 6, thou shalt not kill. 7, thou shalt not steal. 8, thou shalt not commit adultery. 9, thou shalt not bear false witness. And 10, thou shalt not covet. After that, the people get all upset. And remember, the people all gathered around the mountain watching all this go on. And they withdraw away from Mount Sinai in fear. And in the Torah, it describes them going back and forth like 10 times, every time like a mile distance. They're retreating and coming back, and meanwhile, Moses is staying up there next to the smoking, fiery presence of God, who actually has folded the heavens down, both the lower and the upper heavens, onto Mount Sinai, which at this point is upside down and flaming, with flames all the way to heaven. It's quite a sight. I always pictured it would be this quiet affair, just God and Moses, but not so. And God basically tells Moses a couple of things. He says, I want you to remember these things. And the people say, yeah, Moses, you go talk to God. Don't let us talk to God unless he kill us. And then they say, God says, I want you to remember, Moses, no golden or silver images. And regarding my temple, when you make my temple, I want you to build it on a mound of earth where you're going to sacrifice peace offerings and sin offerings. I think the peace offerings are cattle and the sin offerings are sheep, or maybe that's the opposite. And I want you to build it with a ramp, no stairs. And don't use any tools to build the altar, because the tools will defile the stone, because tools are made of iron, and iron can be used as a weapon, so I don't want you using that. And then build a ramp of earth. Don't make a stairs, because you might show your nakedness. But what that really means is that God wants us to have humble steps, small steps, as we approach his altar, not taking nice big steps up and down. So not that we're going to make, he says, so that your nudity won't be exposed, but that's probably not what he really means. Just keep it modest, that's it. And then, that's it. That's the end of Exodus 20. Wow, that was quite a chapter. It took me a long time. I really gave it an intense study. Let me see if I can go through it one more time, enumerate them. I'm trying to make sure that I can remember these in the future, because it was a source of some frustration when I was a Christian that I didn't have them easy hand. I was always thinking, these 10 commandments are really important, but I hope nobody ever asked me to tell me what them commandment number 4 is, by the way, which is thou shalt keep the Sabbath day holy. Here we go. 1, thou shalt not hold any other gods before me. 2, Thou shalt not make any graven or molten images. 3. Thou shalt not take my name in vain, the Lord's name in vain. 4. Thou shalt keep the Sabbath day holy. 5. Honor thy mother and father. 6. Thou shalt not kill. 7. Thou shalt not steal. 8. Thou shalt not commit adultery. 9. Thou shalt not bear false witness. 10. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, house, ass, or servant, or anything for that matter. Said, spoken in good King James fashion with all the thou shalts and the like. And with that, everybody, I'm going to sign off. Thank you for joining me for Freeway Bible Study, Exodus 20 edition. See you in a couple weeks, or maybe more, for Exodus 21, which I know is a tricky one. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye. Have a great day.